man woman. If you don't give my son a child and give me a grandchild, I will rain hell for you in this house.
Mommy, please, it's not my fault.
My name is Kati, and if you had seen me on my wedding day, the way I laughed, the way I held Tony's hand like it was the most sacred thing I had ever touched, you would never have believed that these same hands would one day pack a bag in silence while his family watched from the doorway, smiling. But let me start from the beginning, because this story did not begin with betrayal. It began with love, real love, the kind that makes a young woman believe that if she just gives enough, just endures enough, just prays enough, everything will work out. I was 24 when I married Tony. He was 31, confident, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who walked into a room and made people turn their heads. His mother, Mrs. Vicky, had not wanted him to marry me. She told him plainly, not behind closed doors, but right there at the dining table during our first family dinner, that I was too ordinary, that I came from nothing, that a man like her son deserved better. Tony had laughed it off. He had squeezed my hand under the table and whispered, "Don't mind her. She talks like that to everyone." I believed him. I believed him the way only a woman in love can believe a man, completely, without asking questions, without examining the cracks already forming beneath her feet. We got married in December. White canopy, orange and gold decorations, jollof rice that the whole street still talks about. I wore a gown my mother had saved 3 years to help me buy. I cried at the altar, not from sadness, but from the fullness of it, from the feeling that my real life was finally beginning. But by the second year, something had shifted. We were not pregnant. I did not panic. Many couples try for a year, 2 years. I had read that. I told myself to be patient. I cooked his favorite meals. I prayed every morning before he woke up, kneeling on the cold floor, my voice barely above a whisper. By the 3rd year, Mrs. Vicky started visiting more often, and every visit felt like an inspection. She would walk through our home slowly, eyes moving across everything, the curtains, the kitchen, me, like she was assessing damage. She would sit across from me at the table, sip her tea, and then say something that seemed like conversation but landed like a slap. "Kate, have you seen a doctor? Kate, in our family, the women are very fertile. Tony's aunties all had children within the first year. Kate, are you eating well? Stress can block a womb, you know." Always Kate, always me, never her son. And Tony, my husband, the man who had squeezed my hand under the table, would sit there and say nothing, not one word of defense, not one word of correction. He would just look into his phone or out the window like the conversation had nothing to do with him. That silence was the first cut, the one that doesn't bleed immediately, but later, in the middle of the night, you press your hand to your chest and realize something is broken in there. By year 4, I went to the hospital on my own. I sat in a waiting room with plastic chairs and a ceiling fan that wobbled like it was tired of its own life, and I let a doctor run tests on me. I was terrified, not because I feared something was wrong with me, but because I already knew what would happen if the results came back unclear. I already knew who would be blamed. The results came back. The doctor, a quiet woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, said to Mrs. Kate, "There's nothing here that should prevent you from conceiving. Your hormone levels are fine. Your tubes are clear. Have you and your husband been tested together?" I went home and told Tony. He looked at me from across the sitting room, and something moved behind his eyes, something I couldn't name then, but I understand now. It was fear, the kind of fear that disguises itself as anger. "I don't need any test, Kati." His voice was low and final. "I am a man, a real man. I don't go and sit in a hospital so a doctor can tell me about my own body. There's nothing wrong with me." Tony, end of conversation, Kati. And that was that. I stood in the kitchen that night, stirring soup I no longer had appetite for, listening to the sound of the television from the sitting room, and I understood for the first time what it means to feel alone inside a marriage. Not alone because your partner is absent, alone because they are right there, 3 meters away, and they have chosen not to see you. That night, I cried into the steam of the pot so he would not hear me. But Mrs. Vicky heard about the test results, the ones that showed nothing wrong with me. And instead of that being good news, instead of someone saying, then maybe we should look at Tony, it became something else entirely in her mouth. She went to a hospital without telling my son. She is trying to use paper to prove that she is clean, as if paper can change what God has not given her. And just like that, my clean results became evidence of my guilt. By year 5, they had stopped pretending. At family gatherings, Christmas, Easter, naming ceremonies for other people's children, I would arrive holding Tony's arm, dressed well, smiling, the way you smile when you are fighting to hold your dignity together with both hands. And I would watch as Mrs. Vicky held court among the aunties, speaking just loud enough for me to hear. She is still here. The womb is closed. What can you do? Barren women hold men back, but some men are too soft to act. Barren. That word. I want you to understand what that word does to a woman. It does not just describe, it erases. It takes everything you are, your laughter, your intelligence, your kindness, your history, your dreams, and it reduces you to one thing, one empty, failing thing. I was 31 years old, and they had reduced me to an empty vessel at a table where I was not even allowed to defend myself. Tony never corrected them, not once. And in the quiet moments when I would look at him and wait, just wait for him to say one thing, to stand between me and his family with even a fraction of the energy he used to protect his own pride, he would look away. Every single time, she looked away.
I remember the exact afternoon it happened. It was a Tuesday. I know because I had been to the market in the morning and the Wednesday Women's Fellowship meeting was the next day, and I had been washing tomatoes at the kitchen sink when I heard the gate open. I heard voices. Tony's voice, low and easy, the way he only spoke when he was relaxed, and another voice, lighter, higher, with a kind of brightness to it that immediately made my hands still in the water. I dried my hands on my wrapper and walked to the sitting room doorway. She was standing in my sitting room. Young, maybe 23, 24, light-skinned, the way that Mrs. Vicky's side of the family called it quality. She was wearing a sundress, yellow with small flowers, and she was carrying a weekend bag. Tony stood beside her with his hands in his pockets. He looked at me the way you look at someone when you have rehearsed the moment but still find the word stuck in your throat. Kate, he said, this is Sheila. She'll be staying with us. I did not move. I did not speak. I just stood in that doorway with the sound of the kitchen tap still running somewhere behind me and looked at my husband standing next to a woman with a weekend bag in my sitting room. Staying with us? I repeated. Yes, he cleared his throat. You know the situation. 8 years, Kate. 8 years and nothing. A man has needs. A man has a name to carry. I need children. Sheila understands what I need. The yellow sundress, the weekend bag, the way she did not look at me directly, not with shame, but with the careful avoidance of someone who has been told to expect a scene, but is hoping to avoid one. I felt the floor tilt slightly under my feet. Not from shock, because somewhere in the back of my mind, in that part of yourself that knows things before you are ready to know them, I had felt this coming, like weather, like the specific pressure in the air before a storm that your body registers before your mind does. No, the tilting came from something else, from the absolute clean clarity of seeing the thing you had feared fully assembled in front of you, from realizing that the life you had been trying to save, the marriage you had been bleeding quietly into for 8 years, had already been packed up and handed to someone else. I turned off the kitchen tap. I went to our bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time staring at the curtains. Then I heard Mrs. Vicky's voice at the front door. She had arrived, not by coincidence. She had been waiting outside. She came in greeting Sheila like a daughter, her laughter full and warm, the kind of laughter she had never once used when greeting me. My daughter, I heard her say, welcome, Welcome to this house. God has sent you here. God has sent you here. 8 years of my prayers, 8 years of my herbs and my hospital visits and my kneeling on cold floors at 5 in the morning. 8 years of trying to hold a marriage together with my bare hand while everyone stood at the edges watching and whispering. And God had sent Sheila. In the weeks that followed, my home became unrecognizable. Sheila moved from the guest room into the master bedroom within a month. I was told, not asked, to move into the smaller room at the back, the one with the window that faced the compound wall and let in no morning light. I moved my things in silence. I folded my life smaller and smaller until it fit in that dark room, and I told myself it was temporary, that something would change, that God, the same one Mrs. Vicky had claimed sent Sheila, was watching. Sheila was not unkind in the way that involves shouting or direct cruelty. She was worse. She was indifferent. She moved through my home like it had always been hers, using my kitchen, my pots, rearranging my spice rack, asking the house girl to do things in a tone that made it clear she considered herself the woman of the house. And Tony, my husband, let her. More than let her, he encouraged it. He bought her things. He took her out on the weekends to the kinds of places we had stopped going to years ago. He came home energized, talking, laughing, a version of himself I had not seen in years, as though my presence had been the wait all along. Mrs. Vicky visited almost every day now. Sheila, are you eating enough? Sheila, let me teach you how Tony likes his pepper soup. Sheila, don't stress yourself. That is what the house girl is for. And sometimes, walking past the room where they sat, I would hear her say my name, not loudly, but clearly enough. A woman who cannot give a man a child is like a well with no water. What use is she? I want you to sit with that for a moment. 8 years of my life, 8 years of love, of cooking, of managing a home, of standing beside a man through his job losses and his family drama and his moods, and I had been reduced in my own house to a well with no water. I stopped eating at the table with them. I took my plate to the back room and ate alone, listening to the sounds of their laughter drifting through the walls. I started waking up at 3 in the morning, not from nightmares, but from a deep animal restlessness, like something in my body was refusing to accept that this was my life now, like there was a part of me that had not yet surrendered, even when every other part of me was exhausted. I prayed different prayers in that period. Not the gentle, please God bless my womb prayers of before. These were harder prayers, desperate prayers, the kind that come out more like a groan than words. I did not know then that those prayers were already being answered. I just could not yet see how.
And then something happened that changed everything. But first, if this story is speaking to you, if you have ever been the one blamed for something that was never your fault, subscribe to this channel, because Kate's story is far from over, and what comes next will leave you speechless. The morning Tony announced the pregnancy, he called everyone. I mean everyone. His mother, his uncles, his cousins from the east, the neighbors, the pastor from the church we had stopped attending together, people I had not seen in years, people who had come to our wedding and eaten our jollof fries and danced on our floor and then whispered about my empty womb at every gathering since. He called all of them. He did not tell me first. I woke up to the sound of people arriving, cars pulling into the compound, voices, laughter, the scraping of plastic chairs being arranged outside. I came out of my back room in my morning wrapper, confused, blinking in the light, and walked into a compound full of people. Balloons. Someone had brought balloons. Sheila was sitting in a chair in the middle of the compound like a queen on a throne, wearing a fitted dress that showed the small but unmistakable round of a belly. She was glowing in the way that some women do in early pregnancy, not just physically, but with a specific kind of triumph. Tony stood beside her with his hand on her shoulder. He looked at me as I stepped into the compound, and something passed across his face. not guilt, something closer to satisfaction. The expression of a man who has been waiting a long time to prove a point and has finally arrived at the moment. "Everyone," he said, raising his voice so the whole compound could hear. "As you can see, God has blessed this house. Sheila is carrying my child. 3 months. He paused, and in that pause, he looked at me again. "Some people spent 8 years in this house and gave me nothing. Now you can all see where the problem was." Some people. He did not say my name. He did not need to. Every eye in that compound turned to me. I was standing in my morning wrapper with my hair unstyled, holding nothing, while a compound full of people looked at me with the specific expression of those watching a person receive public punishment they believe is deserved. Mrs. Vicky started ululating, that high, piercing sound of celebration, and others joined. Someone pressed a cold drink in Sheila's hand, someone else was already dishing food, and I stood at the edge of it all, in my own compound, at a party in my own home, surrounded by people who had come to celebrate the proof of my worthlessness. And I felt something inside me go very, very quiet. Not break, quiet. There's a difference. Breaking is loud. Breaking is when you collapse, when you cry in front of people, when you give them the scene they are waiting for. Quiet is something else. Quiet is when the last thing you were still holding on to finally releases, when your hands open and you stop gripping. I went back inside. I sat in my back room. I listened to the party through the wall. The music, the laughter, Tony's voice booming with the pride and happiness I had not heard from him in years. And I made a decision. Not to fight, not to confront, not to beg. I decided to leave. Not that day, not without dignity, but soon. I began to make quiet arrangements. I called my younger sister, Adeazi, who lived on the other side of the city. I told her what was happening in a voice so calm that she cried on the phone while I did not. I told her I needed a few weeks to prepare. She said she would be ready when I was. I started moving my important documents quietly over several days. My certificate, my health card, the small savings I had been keeping in an envelope behind the first back of my wardrobe, the money no one knew about, the money I had been saving since year 3 with a feeling I couldn't explain, as though something in me already knew it would be needed. But here's the thing about plans, about the careful, quiet preparations of a woman who has finally made a decision. Sometimes God, the real one, not the one Mrs. Vicky had been invoking, moves faster than your plans. Because 3 weeks after the party, Sheila collapsed. I was in the kitchen when it happened. I heard the thud first, a heavy, sudden sound from the bedroom. Then Sheila's voice, high and strange, saying Tony's name. Then Tony's footsteps, fast and panicked, in a way I had never heard from him before. Then shouting. Then the sound of a phone call, an ambulance, Mrs. Vicky's voice arriving like a storm through the front gate. I stood in the kitchen doorway and watched them carry Sheila out. I felt nothing that I'm ashamed of. I want to say that honestly. I did not feel joy, but I did not feel the desperate concern of someone who loved the situation either. I felt the strange stillness of a person watching something turn, like watching a tide change direction. I went back to the kitchen, I finished washing the dishes, and I waited. The hospital was on the far side of town, the kind of large government facility that smelled of disinfectant and hard floors, and where the long benches outside the wards were always full of families, sitting with the particular patience of people waiting on news they are not sure they want to receive. Tony had rushed Sheila there in the evening. By the next morning, Mrs. Vicky and 2 aunties had joined him in the waiting area. I know this because the house girl told me. She had become, in those weeks, a quiet kind of witness. The way people who are mostly invisible in a home end up seeing everything. Sheila had developed complications. The doctors needed to run assessments. Standard procedure in these cases. They needed full medical history. Hers And the fathers. The fathers. Tony had not expected that. He had walked into that hospital as a man celebrating a victory, the proof of his fertility finally growing in someone's belly, his name about to be carried forward into the next generation. He had not walked in expecting to be tested. But medicine does not negotiate with pride. The doctor, I learnt this later in pieces from different people who were there, was straightforward about it. Not unkind, but direct. The way good doctors are when they are more committed to truth than to comfort. Mr. Tony, for our assessment of the baby and potential hereditary complications, we need a full fertility and genetic profile from both biological parents. It is routine. Tony had apparently argued, had said it was unnecessary, had used words like invasion and I know my own body. But Mrs. Vicky, sitting beside him, and this is the part that still catches in my throat when I think about it, Mrs. Vicky had told him to do it. She had wanted to make absolutely certain, I think. She had wanted, after all those years of blaming me, to have it confirmed in black and white on hospital paper with a doctor's signature that it had always been me. She had asked for the test herself. So Tony did the test. They all waited. And then the doctor came back. I was not there. I want to be very clear about that. I did not witness this moment, but I have heard it described to me so many times in such detail by people who were in that room that I can see it as clearly as if I had been standing in the corner. The doctor sat across from Tony and Mrs. Vicky. He had the file open in front of him. He took a breath, the kind of breath that doctors take when the information they are about to deliver is going to rearrange someone's life. And he said, Mr. Tony, I need you to understand what I'm about to tell you. Tony had apparently made some kind of dismissive gesture, a wave of the hand, the gesture of a man who does not expect to be surprised. Based on your test results, you have azoospermia. This means there are no sperm present in your ejaculate. This is not a new condition. Based on the levels we are seeing, this has likely been the case for several years, possibly longer. In simple terms, Mr. Tony, you cannot father children. You are medically infertile. The room, by every account, went completely silent. Mrs. Vicky's cup of tea, she had brought tea in a flask the way she did everywhere, tilted in her hand. Someone caught it. Tony did not move. The doctor continued quietly, carefully, with the kind of measured kindness that made what he was seeing even more devastating. Which means the pregnancy cannot be yours. Tony looked at the paper. He looked at the doctor. He looked at his mother. And then the mathematics of it, the simple, unavoidable arithmetic landed. If he could not father children, if this had been the case for years, then the baby Sheila was carrying was not his. The baby that had been celebrated with balloons and ululations and a compound full of witnesses, the baby that had been used to publicly humiliate his wife of 8 years, the baby that had been presented as proof of my failure, my emptiness, my worthlessness, was not his. Mrs. Vicky started crying, not softly, loudly, with a grief that was also anger, also shame, also the specific devastation of a woman realizing that every word she had spoken about me, every public humiliation she had engineered, every family gathering where she had presided over my shame, had been built on a lie. Her lie, his lie, their refusal to know the truth. Tony tried to speak and could not. One of the aunties who was present told me later that she had never seen him look like that. She said it was the look of a man watching the floor underneath him open up. The look of someone who has been so certain for so long that there was no preparation for the alternative. When he came home that night, I was in the back room. I heard him come in, heard him sit in the sitting room for a long time without turning on the television, heard the silence of a house that had for months been loud with other people's celebrations and was now just quiet. He knocked on my door. I did not answer. He stood there for a while. I could see the shadow of his feet under the door. Then he walked away. I lay on my bed in the dark and stared at the ceiling and felt something I had not felt in years. Not happiness, not triumph, peace. A quiet, unfamiliar peace, the kind that comes not from things going well, but from the truth finally being in the room, from the lie finally collapsing under its own weight. The truth was in the room now, and it could not be sent back.
I left the house on a Saturday morning. I did not leave in the middle of the night like a fugitive. I did not cry. I did not argue. I dressed carefully, the way you dress when you want to remember yourself. A dark Ankara blouse, my good sandals, my hair done the night before. I packed the bag I had been quietly preparing for weeks. I took my documents, my savings, the small framed photo of my parents that had sat on my bedside table through every version of my time in that house. Tony was in the sitting room when I walked through with my bag. He looked at me, and I looked at him. This man I had loved with everything I had. This man who had spent 8 years letting his family eat me alive. This man who had thrown a party to celebrate my humiliation. And I felt something very simple. Pity. Not for what had happened to me, but for him. For the smallness that had always been inside him, that I had mistaken for strength. For the years he had spent pointing at me to avoid looking at himself. Kate, he said. I waited. I didn't know, he said, about the test. I didn't know. And the strange thing was, I believed him. That was almost the worst part, that he truly had not known, that all of it, all the cruelty, all the silence, all the years of watching me be destroyed by his family while he looked out of the window, had come not from knowledge, but from cowardice, from choosing not to know, from deciding that it was easier to let me be the answer than to ask the real question. I know you didn't, I said, and I walked out. Adeze was waiting at the gate with her husband's car. She took one look at my face and opened the door and did not ask any questions. She had always been like that. She understood that some things don't need commentary. She just drove. In the weeks that followed, the story spread the way stories spread in communities like ours. Fast, detailed, with the kind of thorough circulation that means eventually everyone knows everything. I heard versions of it from different people. Mrs. Vicky had reportedly not left her house for 2 weeks. Tony had confronted Sheila at the hospital. She had admitted, under the weight of the medical evidence, that the baby's father was someone else, a man from her previous life who she had not fully ended things with. The family that had gathered to celebrate my humiliation began to quietly, carefully rearrange their positions. Some of Tony's aunties called me. They said things like, "We never really believed them," and "You know how Vicky can be." I did not return most of those calls. There's a kind of apology that costs nothing, that comes only after the person offering it has confirmed which side won, and I had no use for it. But here is the part I need to tell you, the part that is the real end of this story. 3 months after leaving, I went to see a doctor at a different hospital, not because something was wrong, but because I wanted, finally, to know the truth about my own body. Not from tests done in fear, not to prove something to someone, just for myself. The doctor was young, precise, with the kind of thoroughness that made me immediately feel that I was in good hands. She ran a full workup. She sat across from me with my results and said, "Mrs. Kate, you are in excellent reproductive health. There is absolutely no medical reason you cannot conceive and carry a pregnancy to term. Your fertility is completely intact." I stared at her. 8 years.
8 years of herbs and prayers and hospital waiting rooms and being called Barren at family tables and at naming ceremonies and inside my own home. 8 years of a word that had been pressed into me like a brand. And I was fine. I had always been fine. The tears that came in that doctor's office were not dramatic. They were quiet. The kind that come from the deepest level of yourself, from whatever part of you has been holding the worst version of a thing and finally releases it. I pressed my hand to my mouth and cried for a few minutes while the young doctor quietly pushed a box of tissues across her desk and did not say anything because she was wise enough to understand that some moments don't need words. I moved on. That is the only way to say it that is honest. I did not leap into a new life. I moved into it carefully, like you move into a house that needs work, one room at a time. I found a small apartment. I went back to the tailoring business I had put aside during the marriage and built it back from nothing. I had customers within a month and regulars within 3. And then I met Daniel. This is not a love story in the way people expect love stories. It was not dramatic or electric or impossible. Daniel was a man my sister introduced me to at a church event. He was a secondary school vice principal. Quiet, steady, with a way of listening that made you feel like what you were saying was the most important thing in the room. He had been married before, briefly, unhappily, and he carried that history with the honesty of someone who has processed something rather than buried it. On our 3rd date, he asked me gently if I wanted children. I said yes, badly. He nodded. Me too. We got married quietly. Just family. The people who actually showed up during the hard years. My mother cried so long that her wrapper was damp at the shoulder by the end of the ceremony. Adeze gave a toast that made everyone laugh and then cry because she mentioned the back room and the balloons and the compound party without once naming Tony or his family, but everyone who needed to understand understood. And then, 14 months into our marriage, I held my baby, a girl. She came in the early morning, which felt right. All that light coming in at once after such a long dark. She was small and solid and warm, with her father's nose and a cry that filled the room immediately, insistently, like someone announcing themselves. I held her against my chest and I felt her breath and her heat and the particular weight of her. Small but real, undeniably, completely real. And in that moment, I thought of Mrs. Vicky's face, of Tony's voice saying, "Some people spent 8 years in this house and gave me nothing," of the word Barren spoken across tables where I had no voice. And I felt it leave me. Not with anger, not with triumph, just release. Like opening a fist you have been holding so tightly you forgot it was closed. They had been wrong about me. Not just wrong, they were wrong about everything. Wrong about where the problem was, wrong about what kind of woman I was, wrong about what I deserved and what I was capable of, and what my life was going to become. And their wrongness had not stopped one single thing that was meant for me. My daughter opened her eyes. I said her name. And somewhere across the city, in a house that was once mine, I imagined Tony sat with the weight of everything he refused to know. The years, the tests, the truth that had been waiting patiently for the moment he could no longer outrun it. I do not know his days now. I do not ask. But I know that a man who builds his pride on a lie cannot keep standing once the lie is removed. The ground simply does not hold. He wanted to leave a legacy. And he had. Just not the one he planned.